Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Up Dynasty here on NCAA Football 14. We have made it to the offseason here in year number 2. The first ever 12-team college football playoff is now in the books, and in case you missed that episode, I encourage you to check out any episode you missed in the series playlist. But we've been able to crown the TCU Horned Frogs as our national champions, upsetting the undefeated Clemson Tigers in the title game. This is a team who wasn't even on our radar at the beginning of the season, but college football playoff MVP Sterling Yorkshire was able to lead the troops with the development of young guys like Harry Stewart and a really good defense. However, they are losing a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball, with JoJo Adeomola being the only projected returning starter. There's a good shot they lose both of their coordinators as well to head coaching positions with how good of a job they did, along with the head coach Joe Lilly. So shout out to TCU for shocking the world, kind of like the real-life TCU Horned Frogs. Nobody really saw them coming, and then bam, here they are. Let's take a look at the All-American teams. This is the All-NCAA first team, the normal suspects who you would expect, and then here's a look at the All-NCAA second team, headlined by Clemson quarterback Kate Hutchinson, who of course was very disappointing in the national championship, lost to TCU, and then here's a look at the freshman All-American team as well. A lot of talented young players amongst this group. Let's also take a look at the stat leaders amongst the rest of college football. And while we do that, I'll go over everything that we're going to be covering today in the offseason. We're going to start with the coaching carousel, take a look at some of the firings and new hirings around the country. My favorite part of today's episode is going to be the players leaving stage. Not so much the seniors who we know are going into the draft, but we're going to find out which underclassmen will be declaring early. We're going to take a look at the transfer portal, see all of the big names who are either leaving for the NFL or moving to new teams. And then after that, we'll briefly cover recruiting. And then we'll talk about the conference changing stage, where we will see some teams moving into new conferences, while also going over a minor seeding change for the college football playoff. I do think the 12-team playoff was a success for the most part, but there are some small changes that I will be making to improve the seeding to make it a little bit more fair, in my opinion. So that pretty much covers what we're going to do for the offseason. We still have a few more seconds for stats, and I have to say something, so you know what? Put a pineapple emoji in the comment section. It helps out the YouTube algorithm by you commenting. It also helps by liking and subscribing. You should do that as well if you have not already. All right, let's simulate forward into the offseason now, and that starts with the coaching carousel stage. Let's take a look at some of the coaching movements around the country. The two biggest jobs opening up are Iowa and Tennessee, with those two schools firing their previous head coaches after they both went 4-8 this past season. Iowa, being a 5-star school, gets the pick of the litter of pretty much anybody who's available, and they're going to go with Clemson offensive coordinator Cassius Troy. The Tigers' offense was incredible this year. They've been incredible for a few years, and Iowa hopes that the offensive coordinator can develop their young quarterback like Kate Hutchinson. Tennessee will be rocking with Central Michigan head coach Tegan Moon, who led the Chippewas to a 12-win season this past year, while his twin brother Tristan Moon will be the new head coach at the University of Wisconsin. The Moon family is going to be eating well, with their two sons getting big-time Power 5 coaching spots. Tristan Moon led Tulsa to an 11-win season last year. Central Michigan needs a new head coach. They're going with Clemson defensive coordinator Emmanuel Charles, so the Tigers have already lost both of their coordinators. Cincinnati made a very interesting hire, poaching away Ayo Ayuluko from Oklahoma State. Ayuluko is staying in conference, and this is a surprising move because Ayuluko's only been at Oklahoma State for 1 year, and you could argue the Cowboys are a better program than Cincinnati, so this might be a lateral move, but Ayo Ayuluko is headed to Cincy. That means Oklahoma has an unexpected job opening. They're going to go with Quentin Weatherspoon, the head coach for Ohio. The Bobcats have been very successful these last few years. Illinois fired head coach Mike Renwick after winning just one game. They'll be getting Andy Pino from Nevada. Ohio needs a new head coach. They'll be hiring Adam Rutledge from Marshall. Boston College needs a new head coach. They're going with TCU offensive coordinator Malik Brown, so he'll be going from the national champions to Boston College. Colorado is getting Ohio State offensive coordinator Dustin Schwend. Fresno State fires John Cummings 1 year after extending him. That's odd, because John Cummings literally won them a national championship by dropping the ball in the end zone. If you know, you know. Leon Moore from Idaho will be the new head coach for them, so Moore will be sticking in the Mountain West. Tulsa needs a new head coach. They'll be going with TCU defensive coordinator Octavius October. Very good hire. TCU's defense obviously was fantastic last year. Marshall needs a new head coach. They ended up going with Buffalo's Jacob Williams. He led the Bulls to the MAC title game a season ago. Kansas fired Kansas alum Rosemont St. Clair. They decided to go with Southern Miss defensive coordinator Chip Barron. Southern Miss has been churning out really good pass rushers left and right, so I think that's a pretty good addition for the Jayhawks. Northern Illinois needs a new head coach. They'll be going with John Paul Patterson, the defensive coordinator for Cal, a very good defensive team out in the Pac-12. Utah State needs a new head coach. They'll be going with Lawrence McCoon, the defensive coordinator out of the University of Arizona. Idaho needs a new head coach. They ended up going with John Cummings. So Idaho and Fresno State swap head coaches. That's kind of funny. Buffalo is getting a big-time hire with Russell Ingram Jr., the former Tennessee head coach, while Texas Tech goes with Mickey O'Neill, the offensive coordinator at Central Michigan. Wow, Texas Tech is really stooping kind of low here. ULM went with Adam Alexander, the defensive coordinator for Nebraska. Clemson's new defensive coordinator is former Cincinnati head coach Bentley Vonder Walson. Ironic because he's more of an offensive guy, but okay. Isaiah Thomas III, the head coach at Iowa, is now going to New Mexico. I guess he still wanted to be the top dog in a program, even though that's a pretty bad program. Xander Vanderwall, the previous Wisconsin coach, is the offensive coordinator now at TCU, while Rosemont St. Clair will be the offensive coordinator for the University of Louisville. Mike Renwick, the former Illinois defensive coordinator, will replace Lawrence McCoon as the DC for the Arizona Wildcats. So that wraps up the coaching carousel stage, and that'll now bring us into the players leaving stage, which again is the part of the video that I'm super excited about. All of the players who are getting drafted will be, of course, added to the Tennessee Titans franchise. Throughout this season in the Titans franchise, we've been doing prospect profiles on all of the top seniors in the draft class. So if you've been following the Titans series, you probably have a good general idea already of some of the top players in the class. So going into the players leaving stage, I wasn't so much curious about the seniors being here. I was more so curious about the underclassmen. So here's a look at all of the juniors and sophomores who will be leaving school early to enter the NFL draft. Don't worry about their projected round. Just disregard that. That doesn't really matter. I'm going to place them where I think they should end up going. But as I got to look at all these players, my initial reaction was that this group of underclassmen declaring is a lot better than last year's group of underclassmen who left early. So I think we're going to see more juniors and sophomores end up as first-round picks. However, we don't have a lot of quarterbacks. The only one here is Texas A&M's Luca Franco, who I think will probably open up as a projected third to fourth-round pick. Although Texas A&M was never really a contender this year, Luca Franco quietly had a great season, and I think he could have been very good next year had he decided to stay in school. But you can't really blame a guy for wanting to get his money, especially considering he is definitely going to get drafted at some point. All of the other top underclassmen quarterback like Justin Tucker, Barrett Cherokee, and Romeo Colucci are all staying in school. Those guys will be the top projected QBs in next year's draft. As for Texas A&M, it sucks for losing Luca Franco. They do have a good young quarterback to replace him in Keyshawn Porter, but he will not be able to throw to Texas A&M's top two receivers, Quinn Crew and Benjamin Cannon, because they are also declaring for the draft along with safety Ace Legerdur. Not to mention, they're losing Kason McDaniels and Josh Cook already on the offense, so they're losing their quarterback and their top four offensive playmakers. Their defense last year was a total disaster, so next year might be a rough one for Texas A&M. Their rivals, the Texas Longhorns, were not so lucky either, losing Corian Hempley, Elijah McKay III, and Dax Boss. They are losing their top five receivers from last year, so it's going to be an adjustment season for their young sophomore quarterback, Onyx St. James. Penn State is taking a big hit on offense, losing wide receiver Shea Jones-Porter, who very well may be the top receiver off the board now, along with running back Aaron Robinson. They were able to retain junior quarterback Lyndon Kirkstead, who will be a senior next year, but they lost their two best offensive weapons. USC also took a big hit, losing 5 total players, including a couple of defensive linemen with Javari Baker and Felati Lamoa. Safety Ramiro Marsh is going to be a big loss, along with wide receiver Hot Rod Pryor, a huge big play threat for the offense. He'll be leaving school early and entering the league as one of the youngest players in the draft class. So those are the schools who really took big hits in terms of losing players. Some other notable guys who I think will be high picks include Adam Kroger from Alabama, Grant Hogsflesh from Oregon State, very underrated player for them. Virginia Tech wide receiver Rashid Salid had a great season. I think he'll probably be a day 2 pick. Matt Montgomery is a guy who I think should have stayed in school. I think he would have had a huge role for the Oklahoma offense next year as their wide receiver 1, but he is going to leave school early. Donovan Bambo, I think, will be a top 50 pick. He was phenomenal this year, particularly in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff against Ohio State. Ryan Faison is another guy who I think should have stayed in school. I think he would have had a big role next year in the LSU offense, and they're also losing wide receiver Travis Bell Jr. as well. Only 2 players tested the waters but decided to not declare, both of them coming from the Oregon Ducks, with Justice Everdeed, the wide receiver, and Ray McLeod, the offensive guard. I did some test simulations to see which players would declare off camera, and there were often times where there were 3 or 4 players who tested the waters and stayed in school, and those players were only ever from Oregon. It was so odd. Barrett Cherokee, the quarterback, was usually on those lists of guys who tested the waters but stayed in school. This time around, he doesn't even test for waters at all. Let's now take a look at the transfer portal, seeing some of the big names moving schools. UCF defensive tackle Daniel Thomas is going to Clemson. Iowa State quarterback Freddie Kimbrell would have challenged for the starting job, but he is now going to Vanderbilt. Former 5-star recruit Daniel Stagel, the wide receiver from Michigan, is now going to Miami of Ohio. Michigan State can't laugh at their rivals because they're losing a really good freshman receiver too. Jerron Kenyon, he's going to Illinois. And Nebraska's also losing a big-time recruit with Matt Hill going to NC State. Freshman All-American Julian Horscobo, the Ohio State guard, is going to Toledo. Texas is losing Roger Carter, a big-time defensive tackle, to TCU. Big addition for a Horned Frog defense, poaching a 5-star recruit from one of their rivals. Shout out to the Horned Frogs making plays. Aaron Campbell had a big interception in the ACC championship game. He is going from Clemson to UConn. Wakesa Adebayo could have gotten big-time playing time with Cincinnati this year. I'm surprised he's leaving, but he is going to Bowling Green. Evan Reynolds, the Florida State running back, is going to Ole Miss. Big-time addition for the Rebel offense. This is a confusing one. Troy quarterback Chris Gruber wants playing time, so he's leaving Troy, where he would have started this year, to South Alabama, where he's not going to be starting next year. That's kind of an odd one, but you do you, Groovy Gruber. Amari Donaldson Jr., the highest-rated player in the portal, is going from Oklahoma to LSU. Huge addition for the Tiger defense, getting a blue-chip level talent added to their pass rush as a possible first-round pick. Charlie Downing will be the next great white Alabama slot receiver, joining the likes of Slade Bolden and most recently Cooper Jensen. There were a few players who thought about transferring but did not, most notably Michigan wide receiver Kurt Henning, a big keep for the Michigan offense. He'll probably have a big role there next year. Let's briefly go over recruiting now, talk about some of the best recruiting classes after signing day across the country. The top-ranked class in the country ends up going to the Oklahoma Sooners. Despite only getting 1 5-star, they had 11 4s and 11 3s. Georgia, Ohio State, Iowa, and Auburn round out the top 5. Iowa's the most fascinating team up here because they have a coaching change. I guess Clemson offensive coordinator Cassius Troy was able to get some of his top Clemson recruits to ultimately flip over to Iowa on signing day. In terms of 5-stars, Ohio State added the most with 3, while USC added 2 along with Texas. The Longhorns were the only team in the country to get 2 top 10 prospects. Tennessee, also with a new head coach. And Boise State. Shout out to the Broncos. They got no 4-stars, but 2 5-stars. Here are all the schools who only got 1. The Cal Golden Bears ended up getting the #1 player across the entire country, so shout out to them. And there were some surprising teams who did not get any 5-stars, including the likes of Clemson and TCU, who obviously appeared last year in the national championship. Syracuse ended up getting the #1 quarterback in the country, although he was not a 5-star. There were no 5-star QBs this year in what ended up being a very weak recruiting class for quarterbacks. Oregon did not get a 5-star. That's a little bit surprising. Florida did a little bit disappointing compared to their expectations. Auburn got a top 5 class without getting a single 5-star. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And then New Mexico State is the honor of landing the worst class in the country. Let's now talk about the custom conferences stage. We're going to be seeing some big-time movement here. And the big storyline going into the custom conferences stage was the defending national champion TCU Horned Frogs. With their contract in the Big 12 expiring, the Horned Frogs had a lot of leverage in terms of what they wanted, being, the national champions. So TCU's display to the Big 12 was make the conference better or remove into the SEC. The SEC was very interested in acquiring TCU, so the Big 12 had to make some moves, and they ended up getting a couple big-time programs, which ultimately was able to convince TCU to stick around in the Big 12. The conference will now be adding a couple of former Power 5 schools with Minnesota and Oregon State. I know they're not the biggest of names, but they are improvements to some of the cellar dwellers originally in the conference. Minnesota is a big-time get. They've been a little disappointing in the Big 10 recently, but I think they'll do quite well in the Big 12. And then Oregon State had no allegiance to the Pac-12, with Oregon leaving the conference last year. So TCU still can feel like the top dogs in what is now a much improved Big 12 conference, who's going to be vying with the ACC and the Big 10 as the next best Power 5 conference after the SEC, of course. With acquiring Minnesota and Oregon State, there were two teams relegated. Kansas and Texas Tech, who combined for 3 wins last year, are moving down to the American Athletic Conference, where they will move into the West Division. Along with those two schools, Southern Miss will also enter the conference, entering the Eastern Division. The ACC loses Pitt, but they gain Navy, which I think is an overall win for the ACC, while Pitt will move into the Big 10, replacing Minnesota. Technically, Pitt is replacing Northwestern, and then Northwestern is taking Minnesota's slot in the West Division. So Pitt gets to be reunited with Penn State. That rivalry is back. Hawaii will replace Oregon State in the Pac-12. Hawaii had a great season last year in the Mountain West, while the Mountain West and Sun Belt will go from 10 teams to 9, with the Mountain West losing Hawaii and the Sun Belt losing Southern Miss. Only 2 conferences, not including the independents, ended up staying entirely intact. The first one being the MAC. The MAC is very lucky to be sticking together because this has been one of the better Group 5 conferences the past couple of years, and I think we'll see teams like Central Michigan, Ohio, and Buffalo getting Power 5 looks pretty soon. The SEC is also surprisingly staying intact. They wanted TCU, they were unable to get them, but I think the team to watch in the future will be South Carolina. The Gamecocks were linked to both the Big 12 and the ACC, so I wouldn't be surprised to see South Carolina move conferences in the future, but for right now, they'll be sticking in the SEC. So before we wrap up here, I do briefly want to go over the small change in terms of seeding for the college football playoff. We're obviously sticking with 12 teams. It's not a huge change, but I think it is relevant. So what I did last year was I had the Power 5 conference champions along with the highest ranked Group 5 conference champion, being Middle Tennessee State, all get automatic bids into the college football playoff, and those 6 teams would be named as the 6 highest seeds in the playoff. All 6 of those teams will still be getting automatic bids. So the conference championship winners of the Power 5 conferences, along with the best Group 5 team, will still automatically get into the playoff, but they will no longer automatically be the top 6 seeds. So for example, Cal last year was probably the worst team in the playoff, but since they won the Pac-12 championship game, they got the 6th seed. That's not going to be the case anymore. A team like Cal will now become probably the 12th seed. I thought it was a little bit unfair for teams like Clemson and Ohio State for being the top seeds last year, for having teams like Florida and Oregon and Michigan as teams they had to play in the quarterfinals, whereas like TCU, for example, only had to play the winner of Cal and Notre Dame. So I think this will make it a little bit more fair to the higher seeded teams. I think Ohio State got especially screwed by this last year because they had to play Florida in the second round. And I think with this new seeding format, a team like Florida will probably end up as like the 5 seed or something. So that's going to wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Next episode will be the season preview. That episode won't be for a little while. I want to get through the Titans franchise offseason first. So probably I would say around a week and a half from now is when I will have the season preview for season number 3 of this series up. And then after that, we will be full steam ahead into year 3 of NCAA Next Up. So that's going to wrap it up. Oh, I already did that part. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Peace out.